Literature gives us the opportunity to experience lives, perspectives, and worlds different from our own. Though remember, friend, a good story has many readings, and this is but one. We open on a teenage girl living her best life in 1983. She listens to Kim Wilde's Kids in America, wears a Michael Jackson button, and has an Iron Maiden poster on her wall. At school, she's always breaking the dress code and getting in trouble for questioning authority. But now she's starting to get in trouble with authorities in her super conservative town, and her parents are worried for her future. Now I know, that sounds like the start of an 80s teen movie, but this story is actually central to Marjane Satrapi's Persepolis, a comic book about growing up in Iran during the tumultuous 1980s. You've read it, right? No? Well, I hope that's not due to the old false comic books aren't real literature stigma, because as we're about to discuss, this medium is perfect for personal stories like this. You know, kind of like how animation can be perfect for lit discussions. Wink. Thanks so much to World Anvil for helping us discuss important worlds in literature. So You Haven't Read Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi. I gotta say, you're missing out. Originally published in French as a 4-part comic book from the year 2000 through 2003, today we'll be talking about the complete Persepolis collection. And since this work is based on her real-life experiences, we'll start by exploring why Satrapi chose to share these details about her life. But a quick heads up before we start, some of this story contains references to suicide and violence, so no worries if you want to skip this one and come back next time. Imagine moving from a country that had been the subject of decades of negative propaganda. So much so that even in your new country, the friends you make the same uninformed assumptions about you and the place of your birth. So as you find yourself explaining the complex reality of your life over and over again, maybe you'd start thinking, you know, I should just write a book. Well, that's exactly what Marjane Satrapi did after moving from Iran to France. In her book's introduction, she discusses how no country should be judged based on its most extreme citizens, and Satrapi employs her work as a window into the lives of Iranian people leading up to, during, and after the 1980 Iranian Cultural Revolution. So let's take a peek through that window to the first part of Persepolis. It's 1980, and patriotic 10-year-old Margie, as her parents call her, is adjusting to the new restrictions imposed by the new fundamentalist government in Iran. Fortunately, though, Margie has a very close relationship with her family, so she feels loved and supported. Her parents expose her to both Iranian and Western philosophy and culture. Her grandmother relates the family's rich history, and she has a special bond with her uncle Anush, who fled to the Soviet Union to escape persecution during the reign of the last Shah of Iran. Like many Iranians, Margie's family supported the protests to remove the corrupt Shah from power and hoped that would result in a less oppressive country, but unfortunately, this was not to be. Margie's father teaches her that the new government is an extension of Iran's history of 2,500 years of tyranny and submission, starting from their own ancient emperors, to the Arab invasions, to the Mongol invasions, and to Western imperialism. Side note, for a little more of Iran's history, you can always check out our Khosrow Anushirwan series. And when the Shah finally abdicated and left for exile, Margie's family joined most of the country in celebrating their new liberation. Many political prisoners were released or allowed to return, Uncle Anush among them. But that celebration was short-lived, as the new government is run by religious fundamentalists, who institute new rules like gender-segregated schools, strict dress codes, and forbidding Western cultural items. Worse, the new government rounds up the old regime's political enemies to execute them on false charges, including Uncle Anush. Before his execution, he is allowed only one visitor, and he chooses his beloved niece Margie. His subsequent death provokes Margie to start speaking up against government propaganda in school and start going out in her illegal punk clothes. Furthermore, since Iran has gone to war with Iraq, their city is being periodically bombed, so her parents decide to send her to live in Europe. Soon, she boards a plane for a new life in Austria. Like some other major contemporaries in comic book writing and illustration, Marjane Satrapi prefers the term comic to the term graphic novel. Also, her bold black and white style of illustration both helps tell the story and allows us to better empathize with her characters. In fact, according to Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics, readers tend to see simplified faces as themselves. Thus, Satrapi's art style allows us to more easily experience Margie's story as our own. Satrapi also adapted Persepolis into an award-winning animated film in 2007, and through her recent work, continued to try to foster a greater understanding of the Iranian people and culture in the West. Her guiding principle being that we as humans aren't all that different from each other after all. Of course, when the teenage Margie lands in her new home, the people she meets there often still react to her based on their anti-Iranian prejudices. Furthermore, she experiences culture shock when she discovers that the European norms and mores, particularly in regards to sex and drugs, are much less restrictive than in her culture. She tries her best to assimilate by behaving like her new friends, but finds she starts to feel that she's losing her identity. Margie eventually finds herself so alienated that she spends 3 months living on the street, until a near-fatal case of pneumonia leads her to decide that she should return home to Iran. Though once home, her downward spiral continues, as she now feels she's too much a Westerner to belong here. Her friends call her immoral for the way she lived in Austria, and Margie sinks further into depression, disconnecting herself from her family and friends, and eventually she attempts to take her own life. However, after her attempts fail, she decides she's not meant to die and starts to try to turn her life around. But even as she works to improve her health, enrolls in art school, and gets married, Margie finds herself growing increasingly put off by the absurd fundamentalist restrictions. For example, in her art class, she's assigned to do a figure drawing of a fully dressed male model, but is instructed to do it without actually looking at the man because that would be immoral. And once again, Margie finds herself rebelling against oppression. She speaks out publicly against dress restrictions, attends mixed-gender parties with alcohol, and decides to amicably divorce her husband. Divorce being a particularly problematic issue for women in conservative Iran, one of the many areas where women are legally subordinate to men. So as the novel ends, Margie moves to France for good, this time of her own accord. Which is where, of course, she continued to encounter so much ignorance about Iran that she decided to write Persepolis full circle. This series' central thesis is that literature can help you see perspectives different from your own. And Persepolis does this in spades by showing us that great books also help you find things in common with people you may have thought at first glance were completely different from you. But through Marjane Satrapi's teenage experiences, written in such a way that will seem familiar to almost anyone, and her simple yet iconic art style, both act as a beautiful invitation to your brain to put yourself right into her illegal sneakers. But don't just take my word for it. Do yourself a favor and find a copy of Persepolis for yourself. That way, you can open up that window and maybe see your neighbors a little more clearly. And if the story of Marjane Satrapi crafting her story inspired you to want to tell an epic tale, our friends over at World Anvil are ready to help you keep track of it all. As you know by now, a bunch of us at Extra Credits have been crafting our own imaginary worlds for years, be they video games, RPGs, or novels. And if you're like us, you know how much work it is keeping all of the disparate elements of a world-building project organized. Well, that, my friends, is where World Anvil comes in. World Anvil is an award-winning toolset used by millions of world builders, writers, and gamers that helps you create, store, and organize your world setting. You can use it to craft entire RPG campaigns, track timelines, family trees, and diplomatic relationships, create interactive maps to help bring your story to life, and once your world is forged, you can easily share what you've built with players, readers, patrons, or whoever. In other words, precisely the tools that let me focus on the fun parts of world building. And with over 25 stunning visual themes at your disposal, it's perfect for all genres, from sci-fi to fantasy, high fiction, and space opera, which, to be completely honest, I've utilized most of across my continual multiverse-spanning Rifts, Gungeon, Stargate, Kingdom Hearts 17th century rom-com mashup campaign. And now that our heroes have shattered all of space-time, they've got to head through Elden Ring's The Lands Between to clean up all my convoluted narrative soup. Well, even a world that complex is no trouble at all, thanks to World Anvil's new autolinker feature, where I can get all of my wackadoo ideas connected quickly and easily for my players to explore. So if you want to up your world-building game and have a really good time doing it, you can check out World Anvil absolutely free. And for a limited time, you can receive 40% off any annual membership by using the code EXTRACREDITS. Then, not only will the worlds you dream up come to life faster, but you'll also be helping out us at EC in the process. Once again, that's code EXTRACREDITS for 40% off any annual membership. And as always, thanks so much for your support. We can't wait to hear about the worlds you build. Greetings, Ahmed Ziad, Turk, Alicia Bramble, Angelo Valenciana, Casey Muscha, Dominic Valenciana, Joseph Blame, Kyle Murgatroyd, and O'Reels1. Y'all are the best!